My name is Chris, and today I'm opening a can of worms. Welcome to the Vinyl Attack. I feel like this video should come with a viewer discretion warning. After all, the topic of cables, be it power, interconnect, speaker, or otherwise, is perhaps one of the most volatile and widely argued topics we encounter in this hobby. As most of you already know, I'm in the camp that firmly believes, or accurately knows, that cables can and do make a difference in audio quality. Not every cable, not every system, not every time, but they can. If your goal in watching this video is simply to refute and rebut everything that is said, feel free to make your way down to the comment section to start your tirade. I won't mind. I have a feeling the other people who know that cables can make a difference are likely used to it as well. But as an option to that, I invite you to take a listen to the things I'll be saying in this video, and perhaps you might even change your mind. If not, that's completely fine, but hopefully you'll at least become curious enough to do some in-home testing yourself. None of the statements made in this video that may disagree with your viewpoints are meant to incite anger or insult intelligence. On the contrary, this video is meant to discuss openly the sound differences I heard when using the GR Research B24 power cable and the Audioquest NRG Z3 power cable, moving forward to be simply called the Z3. If we can have intelligent, thought-provoking dialect thereafter, all the better. Indeed, I hope that is the case. The one cable that we simply cannot do without, but is perhaps the most overlooked, is the lowly power cable. It just doesn't seem to get nearly as much of the limelight as expensive interconnects or speaker cable, especially speaker cable. No, in the world of aftermarket cables, the power cable is the roadie to the speaker cable's guitar hero. I tend to find this a bit ironic, as it is much easier to show the difference a power cable can make than that of a speaker cable. Even outside of the world of high-quality audio, many, if not most of us, have encountered electrical noise due to inferior power cables. Whether it was a TV, an AM/FM radio, a home computer, or even a hairdryer, poorly shielded and poorly made power cables have introduced noise into a multitude of areas around the home. That's why I decided to go with power cables to start my cable reviewing. I think that we can all agree that a well-shielded power cable, at the very least, will reduce line noise. Whether you agree with my next deduction, which is to say that the lower the line noise, the better possible improvement in audio quality, is clearly up to you. But having some common ground with which to start is certainly better than having none at all, and it is indeed a goal of mine. The Z3 I reviewed came in at $349.95, so we'll just call it $350, for a 2-meter length. That's roughly 6.5 feet for those of you using normal measurements. The B24 came in at $389 for a 6-foot length. Concerning lengths, the Z3 comes in available at 1, 2, 3, and 4.5 meters. I'll let you do the conversions on that. While the B24 can be had in 1-foot increments ranging from 4 to 8. I would also fathom the guess that Danny at GR Research would be more than happy to build you any custom length you'd like, but I can't see anyone really needing anything outside of that range. For the uninitiated, you may be thinking that spending $350 for a power cable seems ridiculous. I'm actually not going to try to argue that point, but I do think that there's some context is in order. Firstly, if you're looking for upgraded power cables, it is more than likely because you have a highly resolving system and you're starting to wrap up the final stages of tuning that system. If that isn't the case, I would strongly encourage you to avoid spending your money on cables at this point. When using these two power cables over the course of the past several months, I can say that in my personal experience, I didn't see any large differences when using them on lower and mid-tier components. That is to say, while there was a slight change with some, I would never spend my money myself on upgraded cables for these components. It's not a diminishing return, which is a widely overused and misunderstood phrase. It's just that the lower and mid-tier systems don't have the ability to showcase detail like a higher-end component can. As you start to enter an upper mid-tier to higher-tier product range, things begin to change. Using the Rotel RA6000 integrated amp, a Hagel H390 integrated amp, along with a Denafrips Pontus 2 DAC, I heard noticeable changes between the included stock power cords and the two offerings in this review when connected to a pair of Buchart S400 Mark II speakers, and even more so when connected to a pair of Alta Audio Alyssa speakers. I believe this range, and above, is precisely the target audience that both manufacturers have in mind with these cords. That's why I, along with many other audiophiles, will be the first to tell you that upgraded cables should be the last thing on your hi-fi wish list. In this review, not only do I have my impressions of what these cables brought into the mix, but I also have some hard numbers from my EMI meter that may or may not reinforce the sonic characteristics I'll be describing. I gave both cables a good deal of use over the past several months, taking notes during each listening session to describe what I was hearing. It wasn't until all of this was said and done that I devised a way to test for line noise and see if the scientific data backed up what I was hearing. It may or may not be the end-all of tests, but I think you'll be interested to see the results all the same. Without going over every single bullet point on the Z3's webpage, and there are several, the gist of it is that the Audioquest and their cleverly worded marketing claim the Z3 has no characteristic impedance, superior cord winding structure, makes use of silver-plated shell conductors to drain RF noise, uses a directional and pure copper called perfect surface copper, or PSC, and has direction control conductors to ensure that induced noise is dissipated and drained properly. This last bit has long piqued my curiosity. Can copper wire really be direction controlled? Can any cable be direction controlled for that matter? That is to say, can a wire have an orientation that improves flow from one point to the next? I'm not an engineer, so I called one to ask. My good friend George has a master's degree in engineering and is one of the lead network engineers of DTE Energy here in Michigan, by far the state's leading electricity provider. He regularly designs, upgrades, and maintains multi-million-dollar systems that carry billions of volts of electricity, as well as working on fiber optic projects. According to George, and I quite believe him, copper wire has no directionality. There is no particular grain pattern that would impact the flow of electricity one way or another. It simply carries a current. Any improvement in the transmission of energy from point A to point B in a cable has to do with the wiring pattern itself. The geometry used in wrapping and winding the copper wires in such a way that they might combat outside RF noise. Might, if done properly. We'll take a look at that later. Moving over to the GR Research cable, the marketing couldn't be more different. There is only one paragraph on their site that states the B24 is a new cable design that uses 24-wire braid around a cotton core. The cable is supposed to be braided in a counter-rotation geometry around the grounding cable, making it 8 gauge for each leg. It also uses a 14 gauge copper ground cable that is multi-stranded and a polyethylene insulator. I must admit that while this description is much more direct and succinct, I found it a bit more confusing. I'm not sure how braiding something turns a 14 gauge wire into an 8 gauge wire for each leg. Probably because I also don't know what each leg even means. George theorized about the wiring pattern's mass becoming 8 gauge in diameter when measuring the complete wiring mass, but he was a little confused about the simple description as well. Then again, I was reading this verbiage over the phone at my regular quick cadence. I could have easily cleared this up by emailing Danny, the proprietor of GR Research, to ask him, as I'm sure he would be happy to answer any questions I had, and yours too, as he is incredibly friendly, but I wanted to do this review from an average buyer's perspective. I don't know that many hi-fi hobbyists email the manufacturer about questions on power cables before every purchase, so I decided to take the marketing at face value and see what I could make of it. With all of the tech talk out of the way, even if it may have added more questions than answered in some regards, when using these two different power cables over the course of the past several months, did I in fact hear any differences in sonic quality? As a matter of fact, I did. While some of you might be rolling your eyes already, and others still nodding in agreement, let me first tell you what I heard and then show you the EMI results I recorded afterward that may help confirm or refute my claims, at least in part. The sonic differences I heard between cables wasn't exactly night and day. While they were noticeable and repeatable, they were also subtle. Using one of these power cords isn't going to suddenly change your mid-fi system into something that performs at twice its range. In your hi-fi system, it's also not going to take the bass response and make it slam. It's not going to take the midsection and breathe new life into it, and highs aren't going to suddenly sparkle with delicacy and shimmer that you've never heard before. Additionally, the stock IEC cable actually performs perfectly well. I didn't notice an abundance of noise or a lack of clarity with any of the music I played. Of course, I didn't realize this until I compared the stock cable to the others, but having done that, I can tell you that you aren't missing a massive amount of detail by using your standard included power cord. With the B24, I noticed that things did open up a bit more in the mid-range and upper range. There was ever so slightly a bit more clarity and space to the overall sound, but I also found that it could be a bit much when paired with the Rotel RA6000. The Rotel, already being a slightly forward-sounding amplifier, seemed to have the B24 take that characteristic and push it just a step further, almost to the point of being a touch noisy. There was almost a grainy sound to it. This was much less prevalent with the Hagel H390, considering the damping factor and the amount of technology Hagel uses to eliminate unwanted noise in the amplifiers in the first place. This is the foundation upon which Hagel is built, so I can't say that I'm surprised. I found the pairing of the B24 and the Hagel to be the best of all the products with which I used the B24. Adding that slight bit of openness to the Hagel's incredibly dark background seemed to make for a more balanced and slightly more open sound. There wasn't an abundance of new information coming out of the speakers, but there was just more of a sense of an open presentation, a hint of more air in the mix, and things were just overall a bit sharper. When using the B24 on the Denafrips Pontus 2, I don't know that I heard much difference if I'm being honest. At least not enough that I could sit here and confidently tell you that I did. My goal, after all, is complete transparency and honesty with these reviews. For whatever reason, the B24 performed more noticeably with the amplification that I employed, but I found the same to be true with the Audioquest cable. Speaking of which, when using the Z3, I found many similar attributes when compared to the B24, but just a bit more relaxed, if that's the right word. It's actually a bit difficult to describe. There was a noticeable change in detail and clarity, but again, this isn't a hit you in the face with a baseball bat kind of a difference. It's nuanced and subtle, and yet still very pleasing. I did hear more clarity, and overall things were just a bit more crisp and tight though. There was also a good balance about the sound, and there's a touch more detail in the notes being played. I also found that the Z3 performed the same with all of the amplification that I connected to it. It took the forward nature of the Rotel and reined it in ever so slightly, which I found much more to my preference. At the same time, it took the impossibly black background of the Hagel and still brought out additional detail and clarity in its performance. Well, initially, I would have thought that the B24, being a more open and forward-sounding cable, would be the best fit with the Hagel, and the Z3 with the Rotel, I found the Z3 to be more even keel amongst all the components. So what about these measurements, and how do they factor in? Well, at some point, I devised what I thought to be a solid way to record actual results when it comes to line noise and these power cables. Taking the i5 power station, which can significantly reduce line noise, I tested each cable to see what the effect would be when using them to bring power to the power station. Using my tri-field EMI line monitor, I plugged it into a top socket of a wall outlet and compared these readings when plugging the power station into the bottom of the same outlet. The readings you will see are in millivolts pp, which is peak to peak. The line meter also emits an audible signal to aid in its readings, but in lieu of subjecting you to that noise the entire time, here is a brief sample so you're familiar with what I was hearing the entire time. Yeah, a bit annoying, but it certainly lets you know what's happening with the line noise in your outlets. I then recorded 5-second clips before and after using each of the 3 chords in the power station. Somehow I got it in my head that it would be a good idea to get the average millivolt number as well in this test. This consisted of me scrolling frame by frame in my editing software, writing down each number as it changed on my screen. Afterwards, I double-checked all of my math on each reading to make sure that I was accurate, and then I averaged all of them out for a final number. If ever there was a time to make use of the super thanks button down below to buy me a pint, I think the time spent here doing this math may be worth your kind donation. Looking at the before numbers on test 1, you'll see the fluctuations from the low 600 to mid 700 millivolt range. The average in this first test was 651.35 millivolts. This is a fairly noisy outlet, but not uncommon. I'd imagine this is something you could expect in your own home. After plugging in the stock IEC cord to the power station, and then the power station into the wall in the bottom socket, the numbers dropped in range from the high 80s to the low 100s with an average of 94.7 millivolts, a fairly significant drop that, if nothing else, showcases the power station's effectiveness. You can just watch my review on that product if you would like more information. Moving to the GR Research B24, my before numbers range from the high 500s to the low 800s, but the average was incredibly close to the first test at 655.32 millivolts. When plugging in the B24 to the power station, then the noise level dropped to the range of the mid 130s to the low 150s with an average of 147.1 millivolts. Here I started to see why perhaps I found the B24 to be a bit more open, especially with the Rotel. Last up was the Audioquest NRG Z3. The before readings were slightly lower than the other 2 previous tests, ranging from the high 500s to the high 600s with an average of 639.8 millivolts. While not a drastic change from the other 2, it is still noteworthy. Upon plugging the Z3 into the power station, however, you can see that the fluctuation range went all the way down to the low 60s to the high 70s with an average of 70.5 millivolts. All told, the final results, with a greater number being the better improvement, the Audioquest NRG Z3 showed the biggest improvement with a difference of 569.3 millivolts. The stock IEC cable came in second, showing a difference of 556.65 millivolts, and the GR Research B24 came in third with a difference of 508.22 millivolts. Is this the only test that matters when comparing and contrasting the effectiveness of power cables? Almost certainly not, but it's all I could come up with when considering the tools in my home. I still found it to be useful and interesting all the same, though. A particular surprise to me was the B24's performance falling behind that of the stock IEC cable. While I did still hear an improved sonic result from the B24 over the stock IEC cord, I don't know that every system would be the right system for the B24. That is to say, you would want to test this cable out to make sure it's right for you. The good news on that front, though, is that GR Research offers a 30-day trial period. If, after 30 days, you don't find the sonic improvement to be worth the money that you spent on the cable, you can simply return it for a full refund. That sort of confidence behind a product is becoming more rare these days, and I'm glad to see that GR Research stand behind their offerings, and I would encourage you to take them up on their trial if you're so inclined to look for a new power cable. So what are my overall thoughts on these cables, and what rating did I give each of them? Starting with the B24, I think that is certainly going to be a system-specific type of cable. If you like a quite open sound, or more of a forward presentation, or specifically if you have a low noise outlet, or even a battery-powered direct current system setup like Danny himself, this could be a very good option for you, and I would certainly recommend trying it out. I would give this cable the Silver Seal. While relatively affordable and available in a multitude of custom lengths, the forward nature the B24 brought into my system, along with its touch of line noise, just wasn't what I was looking for. That said, its incredibly solid construction, 30-day trial period, and overall improvement on the sonic characteristics on the equipment I used it upon, the B24 is definitely a solid cable. The Z3 impressed me more than I thought it would. On every amp, and the power station as well, its reduced line noise and ability to bring out subtle sonic improvements were a welcome change to my system. Because of this, I give the Audioquest NRG Z3 the Gold Seal. It's a little pricey if you need to add several of them to your setup, but this is something you'll be doing at the end of your hi-fi tuning stage. Saving up $350 every now and again to add an additional cord isn't a huge ask, and I think it offers a fair reward. Thanks to all of my patrons on Patreon who help make these videos possible. Thanks to you for stopping by to watch, and I look forward to next time.